The apples grew in perfect rows, but no one had planted them in 30 years. I discovered this on a Tuesday in late September, 3 days after my severance package ran out and 2 weeks before my landlord was due to evict me from the studio apartment in Brooklyn, where I'd been living since college. I was driving through upstate New York with everything I owned packed into a 15-year-old Honda Civic. No destination in mind, just the vague notion that somewhere cheaper had to exist. Somewhere I could figure out what came next. The orchard appeared on my right, acres of trees heavy with fruit, stretching back from the road toward distant hills. A faded sign read, Blackwood Orchard, Est, 1947, and below it, smaller, fresh apples. No hours listed. No indication of whether the place was open or closed or abandoned. I slowed down, pulled onto the gravel driveway, and stopped. The trees were immaculate. That was the first thing I noticed. In late September, orchards should show signs of harvest ladders propped against trunks, bins of fruit waiting to be processed, workers moving through rows with bags and poles. This orchard had none of that. Just trees bearing fruit, grass mowed in neat lines between them, and a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat when I turned off the engine. Before we continue, if you'd like to join me for more stories like this, feel free to subscribe. I share a new one every day. And if you don't mind, leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel. I got out of the car and walked toward the nearest tree. The apples were red and gold, the kind you see in paintings, impossibly perfect. I reached up and picked one, expecting it to be mealy or worm-eaten or somehow flawed, but it was flawless. The skin was smooth and cool against my palm, the weight of it substantial and real. I bit into it without thinking, without permission, and the taste exploded across my tongue, sweet and tart and complex, better than any apple I'd ever eaten. Juice ran down my chin and I laughed. Actually laughed for the first time in weeks. You planning to pay for that? I spun around, nearly dropping the apple. A woman stood about 10 feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She was maybe 60, maybe older, with steel gray hair pulled back in a braid and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. She wore work boots and jeans and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, practical and no nonsense. I'm sorry, I said, wiping my chin with the back of my hand. The sign said fresh apples, and I wasn't thinking. How much do I owe you? She stared at me for a long moment, then something in her face shifted. You're not from around here. Brooklyn. Well, I was. Now I'm from nowhere, I guess. Nowhere's a dangerous place to be from. She stepped closer, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away. You running from something? Or toward something? Neither. Both. I don't know. The honesty surprised me. I didn't usually talk to strangers like this. Didn't usually admit to being lost. But something about this woman, about this place, made pretense feel pointless. She nodded as if this answer satisfied her. You know anything about apples? I know how to eat them? The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. That's a start. I'm Eleanor Blackwood. This is my family's orchard. Or was. Hasn't been properly run in decades, but the trees keep producing anyway. Stubborn things. She paused, weighing something. You looking for work? I blinked. I don't know anything about orchards. That's not what I asked. Yes, I said, because what else was I going to say? Because my savings account had $300 left, and my credit cards were maxed out, and I had nowhere to go and nothing to lose. Yes, I'm looking for work. Room and board plus $200 a week. Works hard. Hours are long. You'll learn or you'll leave, but either way, you show up on time and you do what I tell you. She extended her hand. Deal? I shook it, her grip firm and calloused. Deal. I'm Maya by I know who you are. How could you possibly lucky guess? that almost smile again. "Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying." I followed her past the trees, toward a cluster of buildings I hadn't noticed from the road. There was a large barn, red paint peeling, but structure solid, and beside it a smaller building that might have been a farmhouse once. Behind those, a cottage that looked like something from a fairy tale. Stone walls, sloped roof, windows with actual shutters. Eleanor led me to the cottage and pushed open the door, which wasn't locked. Inside was sparse but clean. A main room with a kitchenette, a bedroom barely big enough for the double bed it contained, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub that had seen better days. The furniture was old but cared for. The floors were swept, and everything smelled faintly of apples and wood smoke. "It's not much," Eleanor said, "but it's dry and it's warm, and it's yours as long as you're reworking here." "It's perfect," I said, and meant it. After 3 years in a 400-square-foot studio, where I could hear my neighbors, every argument and smell their cooking, and never feel truly alone, this felt like a palace. "Good. Get settled. Tomorrow we start at sunrise. Wear clothes you don't mind ruining." She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. "Maya, the apples grow themselves, but they don't pick themselves. Remember that." She left before I could ask what that meant. I spent the rest of the afternoon unloading my car, which didn't take long. I didn't own much clothes, books, a laptop, a box of kitchen supplies, another box of things I couldn't categorize, but couldn't throw away. My entire life fit into the cottage with room to spare, which was either liberating or depressing, depending on how I looked at it. By evening, I was exhausted, emotionally more than physically. I made a peanut butter sandwich from supplies I'd bought at a gas station that morning, ate it sitting on the front step of the cottage while watching the sun set over the orchard. The trees seemed to glow in the golden light, their fruit luminous, and I felt something in my chest loosen, some knot of anxiety I'd been carrying for months beginning to unwind. This was temporary, I told myself. Just a stopping point until I figured out my next move, until I saved enough money to go somewhere else, somewhere with a real job and a real apartment and a real plan. This wasn't my life. This was just a pause. But as I sat there in the fading light, listening to birds, I couldn't name singing songs I didn't recognize. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled into something significant, something that would matter more than I could understand yet. I went inside as darkness fell, took a long bath in the clawfoot tub, and fell asleep in the strange bed within minutes, too tired to lie awake worrying about tomorrow. Sunrise came early and aggressive, light flooding through the bedroom window, straight into my eyes. I groaned, rolled over, and checked my phone. 5:30. I'd set an alarm for 6, but apparently Eleanor had other ideas, because there was a knock on the cottage door, sharp and insistent. "Up and moving," her voice called. Daylight's burning. I dragged myself out of bed, pulled on jeans and an old t-shirt and a hoodie, and stumbled to the door. Eleanor was already walking away, headed toward the barn. I grabbed my sneakers, shoved my feet into them without bothering with socks, and hurried after her. The morning was cold, my breath visible in the air. The orchard was shrouded in mist that made the trees look ghostly, unreal. Eleanor moved through it like she knew every stone and root by heart, which she probably did. In the barn, she handed me gloves, a canvas bag with a shoulder strap, and something that looked like a long pole with a hook on the end. "This," she said, holding up the pole, "is a fruit picker. You use it for apples too high to reach. But most of them you can get by hand." She demonstrated, reaching up to pluck an apple from a nearby tree with practiced efficiency. "Twist gently. The apple comes away clean. Don't yank. Don't bruise them. Every bruise is money lost." "I thought you said this place hasn't been properly run in decades? Hasn't been sold in decades?" "Doesn't mean I let the fruit rot." She handed me the pole. "You'll start with the trees closest to the barn. Fill your bag. Bring it back, empty it into those bins. She pointed to large wooden crates stacked near the barn entrance. Then go back out and do it again. We've got about 200 trees that need picking before the first frost. 200? I stared at the orchard stretching away into the mist. How long do we have? 3 weeks if we're lucky. 2 if we're not. And it's just us? Just the 2 of us? Eleanor's expression was unreadable. The orchard provides what we need. You'll see. Now get moving. We're losing time. She walked away, leaving me standing there with the pole and the bag and a growing sense that I agreed to something far more complicated than I understood. But I didn't have anywhere else to be, so I walked into the orchard and started picking apples. The first hour was meditative. There was something soothing about the repetitive motion reach. Twist, place in bag, repeat. The apples were uniformly beautiful, each one perfect, and I started to understand Eleanor's comment about not letting them rot. These weren't grocery store apples. These were something else, something worth saving. By the second hour, my arms were aching. By the third, my shoulders were screaming, and my lower back was joining the chorus. I'd filled and emptied my bag 6 times, making a tiny dent in the first row of trees, and I was beginning to understand the scope of the task ahead. When I brought my 7th bag to the barn, Eleanor was there sorting through one of the bins I'd already filled. "Not bad," she said, which I took as high praise. "You're bruising about 1 in 20. We'll get that down to 1 in 50 by the end of the week. I'm trying to be gentle. I know. It takes practice." She pulled out an apple with a small brown mark on its side. "See this? That's from gripping too hard. Hold them like you're holding something precious. Because you are." I nodded, took the apple, studied the bruise. What makes these apples so special? I've never tasted anything like them. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, her hands still moving through the bin, sorting, checking, her movements automatic. They're heirloom varieties. Some of them don't exist anywhere else anymore. My grandfather cultivated them, crossbred them, spent his whole life developing fruit that could survive our winters and produce in our soil. When he died, he left me the orchard, told me to take care of it. So I do. But you said it hasn't been properly run. Running an orchard and caring for an orchard are different things. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were sharp. One's about profit, one's about responsibility. I chose responsibility. There was clearly a story there, something painful and complicated, but I didn't know Eleanor well enough to push. Instead, I just nodded and took my empty bag back to the trees. The rest of the day blurred together. Pick, empty, until my muscles were beyond pain to a kind of numb acceptance. Eleanor worked alongside me, moving through the trees with an efficiency that made my efforts look clumsy and slow. She didn't talk much, but occasionally she'd call out instructions. "This tree's ready. That one needs another week. Don't bother with the drops. They're for the deer." When the sun started to set, she finally said, "That's enough for today." I nearly collapsed with relief. "You did good work," she said as we walked back to the barn. "Better than I expected for a first day. I feel like I've been hit by a truck. That means you're using muscles you forgot you had. Take a hot bath. Eat something. Get to bed early. Tomorrow will be worse before it gets better." She wasn't wrong. The next morning I could barely move, every muscle protesting as I dragged myself out of bed. But I showed up at sunrise, and I picked apples, and I came back the next day and did it again. By the end of the first week, my body had adapted to the work. I was still tired, still sore, but it was manageable. And something strange was happening. I was sleeping better than I had in years. No lying awake at 3 in the morning, worrying about money or my career, or whether I'd wasted my 20s on a job that didn't matter. I fell into bed exhausted and slept dreamlessly until dawn, when the work began again. Eleanor and I fell into a routine. We'd start at sunrise, work until midday, break for lunch, then work until sunset. She'd make sandwiches or soup, simple food that tasted better than it had any right to. And we'd eat sitting on the barn steps, not talking much, just existing in the same space. On the 8th day, as we sat eating grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup from a thermos, Eleanor said, "You haven't asked me why the trees are so perfect. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know." She smiled. A real smile this time, not just the ghost of one. Most people would have asked on day one, would have demanded an explanation. You just started working. I needed the work more than I needed answers. Fair enough. She finished her sandwich, wiped her hands on her jeans. But you should know, the trees grow themselves, because my grandfather made them that way. Spent 40 years breeding apples that would thrive with minimal intervention. Disease-resistant, pest-resistant, drought-tolerant. He wanted to create something that would last, that wouldn't need constant human management to survive. Sounds like he succeeded. He did, but success has a cost. She stood, gathering the lunch things. The trees grow, but they need to be harvested. If the fruit isn't picked, it falls and rots and attracts pests, and eventually the trees stop producing. They need us as much as we need them. It's a relationship, not a conquest. I thought about that as we went back to work, about the difference between conquest and relationship, about what it meant to care for something without trying to control it. That night, alone in the cottage, I opened my laptop for the first time in over a week. My inbox was full of job rejection emails, LinkedIn notifications, messages from former colleagues asking how I was doing. I closed it all without responding. It felt like correspondence from another life, from a person I used to be, but wasn't anymore. Instead, I opened a blank document and started writing. Not a resume or a cover letter or anything practical. Just words, observations about the orchard, about Eleanor, about the way the light moved through the trees in the afternoon and made everything look like a painting. I wrote for an hour, maybe more, until my eyes were heavy and my thoughts were slowing down. When I finally closed the laptop and got ready for bed, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Contentment. Not happiness, exactly, but a sense of being where I was supposed to be, doing what I was meant to do, at least for now. We worked shorter days, coming in when the rain got too heavy, going back out when it lessened. The barn became our refuge, warm and dry, smelling of hay and apples and old wood. "Nothing goes to waste," she said as we worked. "You make it sound almost spiritual." "Can you?" "Sometimes." She glanced at me. "You're a writer, aren't you?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you—" "The way you look at things. Like you're trying to find the right words for what you're seeing." "Where is she now?" "Seattle. Works in tech. Makes more in a month than this place generates in a year." Eleanor's hands didn't stop moving as she talked. Still sorting, still working. She offered to buy me out, set me up in a condo somewhere. Couldn't understand why I'd want to stay here. But you do. Someone has to. Someone has to remember what this place is, what it means. Otherwise, it's just land. Just potential profit for some developer who'll turn it into condos and strip malls. She looked at me directly then. That's what happened to most of the orchards around here. Sold off, paved over, gone. This is one of the last ones left. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just kept sorting apples, keeping pace with Eleanor's practiced rhythm. That night the rain intensified, drumming on the cottage roof so hard I could barely hear myself think. I made tea, wrapped myself in a blanket, and sat by the window, watching lightning illuminate the orchard in brief, stark flashes. The trees looked ancient in those moments, timeless, like they'd been here long before humans and would be here long after. Around midnight, the power went out. I found candles in a kitchen drawer, of course. Eleanor would have prepared for this, and lit them, filling the cottage with flickering, warm light. I should have been nervous, alone in an unfamiliar place with no electricity and a storm raging outside. But I wasn't. I felt safe, protected by the stone walls and the isolation, and the simple fact that there was nothing out there that wanted to hurt me. I fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, and dreamed about trees with roots that went down forever, connecting to something vast and ancient beneath the earth. By the third week, we'd harvested over half the orchard. The bins in the barn were stacked high, filled with apples in every shade of red and gold and green. Eleanor had started making calls to buyers' restaurants in the city, farmers markets, specialty grocers, who paid premium prices for heirloom fruit. "We'll make about 40,000 this season," she said one morning as we worked. "Maybe 50 if the quality holds. Not enough to hire help or upgrade equipment, but enough to keep going another year. Have you ever thought about expanding? Marketing more aggressively?" She shook her head. "That's not what this is about. I'm not trying to build an empire. I'm just trying to maintain what exists, to honor what my grandfather created. When I'm gone, someone else can decide what to do with it. But while I'm here, I'm going to do it right." "What happens when you're gone? Will your daughter take over?" "No." The word was flat, final. She made her choice. I respect it, even if I don't understand it. The orchard will go to whoever wants it, whoever sees its value beyond just dollars and cents. I thought about that a lot over the following days. About value and legacy and what we leave behind. I'd spent 5 years in Brooklyn working for a marketing firm, creating campaigns for products no one needed, building brand awareness for companies that would forget me the moment I left. I'd thought I was building something, a career, a future. But when they laid me off, I discovered I was just another replaceable cog, easily removed, quickly forgotten. Here, in this orchard, the work was simple, but it mattered. Every apple I picked was food for someone. Every tree I cared for would produce again next year. It wasn't glamorous, wasn't impressive to put on a resume, but it was real in a way my old job had never been. On the 18th day, as we were working through a section of older trees near the back of the property, I found something strange. A tree that was different from the others, its apples smaller and darker, almost purple. I called Eleanor over. She stared at the tree for a long moment, then reached up and picked one of the dark apples. She bit into it, chewed thoughtfully, and her eyes widened slightly. "I'll be damned," she said softly. "He did it." "Who did what?" "My grandfather." This was his final project. He was trying to breed an apple that could survive even harder winters, that would produce later in the season than anything else. He called it the November apple. Said if he could get it right, it would extend the harvest by weeks, maybe months. She looked at the tree with something like wonder. I thought he'd failed. This tree hasn't produced in years. I almost cut it down a dozen times. But now it's producing. Now it's producing. She handed me the apple. "Try it." I bit into it and tasted something complex and strange sweet, but with hints of something darker, almost wine-like. It was unlike any apple I'd ever had, challenging but compelling. "It needs work," Eleanor said. "The flavor profile isn't quite there yet. But the fact that it's producing at all ... double quotes." She trailed off, staring at the tree like it held answers to questions she'd been asking for years. We picked every apple from that tree, handled them with extra care, kept them separate from the others. Eleanor spent the evening examining them, making notes in a worn notebook I'd never seen before, comparing them to descriptions her grandfather had written decades ago. "This changes things," she said as we sat on the barn steps watching the sunset. "If I can cultivate this variety, if I can get it stable and consistent, it could be something really special. Something that carries on his work." "You sound excited," she smiled, a real smile that made her look younger. "I am. I've spent 15 years just maintaining, just holding the line. But this ... this is possibility. This is future." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed thinking about the November apple, about Eleanor's excitement, about the way a single tree could could represent hope and continuity, and the refusal to give up on something that mattered. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and opened my laptop. I started writing in earnest then, not just observations, but a story about an orchard that grew itself, about a woman who tended it against all odds, about the way places hold memory and purpose and meaning even when the world forgets them. I wrote until dawn, until Eleanor knocked on my door, until it was time to go back to work. I was exhausted but energized, filled with something I hadn't felt since before I lost my job purpose. The final week of harvest was the hardest. We were racing against the forecast, against a cold front moving in. It would bring frost and potentially end the season early. Eleanor pushed us to longer hours, starting before sunrise, working past sunset with headlamps strapped to our foreheads, picking by feel as much as sight. My body had adapted to the work now. I was stronger than I'd been in years, my arms and shoulders corded with new muscle, my hands calloused and capable. I could pick as fast as Eleanor, could judge an apple's ripeness by touch, could move through the trees without thinking, my body knowing the rhythm. On the 27th day, we picked the last apple from the last tree. Eleanor and I stood there in the twilight, exhausted and dirty and triumphant, surrounded by empty trees and full bins, and the satisfaction of work completed. "We did it," she said simply. "We did." She turned to me, and her expression was serious. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to think before you answer. Don't just say yes because you feel obligated, or because you think it's what I want to hear. Okay, stay through the winter. Help me with the pruning and the maintenance and cultivating the November apple. I can't pay much more than I'm paying now, but the cottage is yours, and I can teach you everything my grandfather taught me." She paused. "You're good at this, Maya. Better than good. And more than that, you care. I can see it in the way you handle the fruit, the way you look at the trees. This matters to you. It didn't matter. Somewhere in the last month, without meaning to, I'd fallen in love with the orchard, with its quiet rhythms and its stubborn survival, and its refusal to conform to anyone's expectations of what agriculture should be. Yes, I said, I'll stay. Eleanor nodded, smiled. Good. Now let's get these bins loaded. We've got deliveries starting tomorrow. The next week was chaos of a different kind. Trucks coming and going, buyers examining fruit, money exchanging hands. Eleanor handled it all with the same calm efficiency she brought to everything, negotiating prices, arranging transport, keeping careful records in her warm notebook. The orchard generated $47,000 that season. Eleanor paid me my wages, set aside money for taxes and equipment repairs and next year's supplies, and put the rest into savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to keep going. Enough to matter. As October turned to November, and the trees lost their leaves and the orchard became a landscape of bare branches and sleeping earth, Eleanor began teaching me the winter work. Pruning, done carefully with sharp tools and steady hands. Soil management, testing pH levels and adding amendments where needed. Pest control, setting up barriers and traps for mice and deer. And most importantly, she taught me about the November apple. We took cuttings from the producing tree, prepared them for grafting, made plans for next spring when we try to propagate it, to create more trees, to turn her grandfather's final vision into reality. I wrote every night now, filling pages with observations and stories and reflections. I'd stopped checking my LinkedIn, stopped applying for jobs, stopped thinking about my old life as something I needed to get back to. This was my life now, dirt under my fingernails, muscles I could feel working, work that meant something beyond quarterly profits and shareholder value. In mid-November, Eleanor's daughter called. I was in the cottage when I heard Eleanor's voice through the window, tense and careful, navigating a conversation that clearly wasn't easy. When she knocked on my door an hour later, her expression was complicated, sad, and resigned, and maybe a little relieved. Catherine wants to visit for Thanksgiving, she said. First time in 5 years. Says she wants to talk about the orchard, about the future. That's good, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe, probably. She sat on my front step, looking out at the bare trees. She's always seen this place as a burden, something holding me back from a real life. She doesn't understand that this is my real life, that I chose it deliberately. Maybe she's ready to understand now. Maybe. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Would you join us? For Thanksgiving dinner? I know you probably have your own plans. I don't, I said quickly. I'd love to. The truth was, I'd been dreading Thanksgiving. My parents had moved to Florida 2 years ago, and while they'd invited me to visit, the thought of explaining my current situation, living in a cottage on an orchard, working as essentially a farm laborer, filled me with preemptive exhaustion. It was easier to just stay here, to avoid the questions and the judgment, and the inevitable conversation about when I was going to get a real job. The week before Thanksgiving, Eleanor and I cleaned the farmhouse, which she lived in, but which I'd never been inside. It was beautiful in a worn, comfortable, way-wide plank floors, high ceilings, a kitchen with a massive wooden table, and a stove that looked like it was from the 1940s. There were photographs on every surface, covering every wall Eleanor as a young woman. A man I assumed was her husband who died before I arrived, and Catherine at various ages, from baby to teenager to adult. She looks like you, I said, studying a picture of Catherine at maybe 20, standing in the orchard with arms crossed and expression defiant. She has my stubbornness, that's for sure. Eleanor dusted the frame carefully, and my inability to compromise on things that matter. We're too similar. That's the problem. Neither of us knows how to bend. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and clear. I helped Eleanor cook turkey and stuffing and all the traditional foods, plus an apple pie made with our harvest, the fruit stored carefully in the barn's cold room. Around 2 in the afternoon, a Tesla pulled into the driveway, looking absurdly out of place against the rustic backdrop of the orchard. Catherine emerged, and she did look like Eleanor, same gray eyes, same determined set to her jaw, same way of surveying her surroundings, like she was cataloging everything. She was dressed in expensive casual clothes, the kind of carefully curated simplicity that costs a fortune. And when she hugged her mother, there was genuine affection there, but also tension, years of unresolved conflict compressed into a brief embrace. You must be Maya, she said, turning to me with a professional smile and an extended hand. Mons told me about you. All good things, I hope. She said you're a hard worker and you care about the orchard. That's the highest praise she knows how to give. There was no malice in the statement, just observation. Dinner was polite and slightly awkward, the three of us navigating around topics that clearly held landmines. Catherine talked about her work, something involving artificial intelligence and data analysis that I only partially understood. Eleanor talked about the harvest, about the November apple, about plans for next season. I mostly listened, aware that I was witnessing something significant, a conversation happening beneath the surface words. After dinner, as I cleared plates and Eleanor made coffee, Catherine followed me into the kitchen. How much is she paying you? She asked quietly. Enough. I could get you a job in Seattle. Real job, real salary, health insurance, 401k. You're clearly smart, capable. You could do better than this. I set down the plates I was carrying and turned to face her. This is better. For me, at least. I spent 5 years doing the kind of work you're describing, and I was miserable. Here, I'm not. Here, you're working yourself to exhaustion for poverty wages. Here, I'm doing work that matters. That's worth more than you're calculating. Catherine studied me for a long moment, and I saw Eleanor in her expression. That same intensity, its same refusal to accept easy answers. You really believe that? I do. She nodded slowly. Okay, I can respect that. even if I don't understand it. Later, after coffee and pie, Catherine and Eleanor went for a walk through the orchard. I stayed behind, giving them space, watching from the farmhouse window as they moved between the bare trees, two figures in the fading light, talking about things I couldn't hear. When they came back an hour later, something had shifted. Eleanor looked lighter somehow, and Catherine looked thoughtful, her professional polish slightly cracked. "I'm not going to take over the orchard," Catherine said as she gathered her things to leave. "I want you to understand that, Mom. It's not going to happen. But ... She paused. "I'm going to help you set up a website, professional marketing, online sales. You're sitting on something valuable here, and you're not capitalizing on it. That needs to change. I don't want to turn this into... I know what you don't want. But you're 73 years old, and Maya isn't going to be here forever, and you need to think about sustainability beyond just next year. Let me help. That's all I'm asking." Eleanor looked at me, and I shrugged. She's not wrong. If we could reach more buyers, command better prices, we could actually expand. Hire help, maybe even develop that November apple into something commercially viable. "See?" Catherine said. "Maya gets it. Just ... Think about it, please." She left as the sun was setting, and Eleanor and I stood in the driveway, watching her car disappear down the road. "That went better than I expected," Eleanor said. "She cares about you. She just shows it differently than you want her to." "I know. Doesn't make it less frustrating?" She turned to look at the orchard, at the bare trees standing in silent rows. "But maybe she's right. Maybe I've been too focused on preservation and not enough on evolution. My grandfather adapted, experimented, tried new things. I've been maintaining, but not growing. So we grow," I said simply. Over the following weeks, Catherine was true to her word. She hired a web designer, a photographer, a marketing consultant. They descended on the orchard like a well-meaning invasion, taking pictures of everything, asking questions, building a narrative around heritage and quality and sustainable agriculture. I helped write copy for the website, drawing on all those hours I'd spent observing, all those nights I'd spent writing. The story practically told itself, a family orchard, maintained against all odds, producing rare heirloom varieties, each apple the result of decades of careful cultivation. The site launched in early December, and orders started coming in immediately. Not a flood, but steady interest from people willing to pay premium prices for something special. Eleanor hired a part-time helper, a local college student named Tom, who needed winter break work and didn't mind hard labor. And through it all, the orchard slept, gathering strength for spring. I wrote more seriously now, working on what was becoming a book about the year I'd spent here, about what it meant to find purpose in unexpected places. I sent the first 3 chapters to a literary agent in New York, a contact from my old life who I'd stayed in touch with. She responded within a week. "This is different from what you used to write. It's better. Keep going." Christmas came quiet and peaceful. Eleanor invited me to the farmhouse, and we exchanged small gifts. I gave her a leather-bound journal for recording apple varieties and cultivation notes. She gave me a set of pruning shears with my initials engraved on the handle. "You're part of this now," she said as I held the shears, surprised by the emotion in my throat. "Part of the orchard story. I want you to know that." "I do know. This place ... I paused, trying to find the right words. "It saved me. I was drowning before I found it." "Before you found me. Before you found us," Eleanor corrected. "This works both ways." On New Year's Eve, I stood alone in the orchard at midnight, watching fireworks from distant towns light up the sky. The trees were covered in snow, their branches holding the weight gracefully, and I thought about cycles, how things end and begin, how death and dormancy are just preparation for new growth. I'd been here 4 months, 4 months that felt like both forever and no time at all. I was a different person than I'd been in September, stronger, quieter, more sure of myself in ways that had nothing to do with career titles or salary figures. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Happy New Year, sweetheart. Any news on the job front?" I looked at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I have a job. I'm working at an orchard upstate. It's good. I'm happy." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, that's all that matters. Love you. January brought serious cold and serious work. Eleanor taught me advanced pruning techniques, how to shape trees for maximum production, how to encourage new growth and eliminate dead wood. We worked through the November apple's genetics, studying her grandfather's notes, making plans for spring grafting. Tom proved to be a good worker and better company. He was studying environmental science at SUNY New Paltz, writing his thesis on sustainable agriculture, and the orchard became both a case study and a passion project for him. He brought new ideas, fresh perspectives, challenged some of Eleanor's long-held assumptions in ways she grudgingly admitted were valuable. "I'm getting old," she said one afternoon as we worked. "Need younger people around, people who'll carry this forward when I can't anymore." "You're not that old. I'm old enough to know I won't live forever. And I'm finally okay with that, as long as this place continues. As long as someone remembers what it means." February came with ice storms that coated everything in crystal, made the orchard look like something from a dream. We lost 3 trees to the weight of the ice, old ones whose roots had finally given up. Eleanor mourned them like family members, spoke over them before we cut them up for firewood, thanked them for their years of service. "Everything ends," she said as we stacked the wood, "but the orchard continues. That's what matters." March brought the first hints of spring buds on branches, soil softening, birds returning. We started grafting the November apple cuttings onto new rootstock, careful and precise, giving her grandfather's final vision another chance at life. And we worked on the marketing that Catherine had set up, filling orders, responding to emails, building relationships with chefs and retailers who valued quality over convenience. The orchard was becoming profitable in ways Eleanor had never imagined, but she was careful to maintain the balance. Grow, but don't compromise. Expand, but don't exploit. I finished my book in April and sent it to the agent. She loved it, sold it within 2 weeks to a publisher who specialized in narrative nonfiction about rural America. It would come out next fall, a year after I'd first driven up that gravel driveway and found a life I hadn't known I was looking for. When spring truly arrived and the trees began blooming, the orchard transformed into something magical, thousands of white and pink blossoms covering the branches, bees humming through them, the air sweet with pollen and promise. "This never gets old," Eleanor said as we walked through the blooming trees. 73 years old, and this still takes my breath away. "It should," I said. "It's worth having your breath taken." Enough money to hire full-time staff, to properly develop the November apple, to turn the orchard into something that could truly last. "I need to talk to Eleanor," I said when he finished. "But yes, we're interested. Very interested." That night, I walked over to the farmhouse and told Eleanor about the call. "This could work," she said. "This could actually work. We could make this place into what my grandfather always dreamed, not just an orchard, but a legacy, a teaching place, a preservation site. Is that what you want?" But the way it connected people across generations and distances, the way it made everyone who encountered it want to protect it. Summer brought heat and growth, and the green fruit beginning to form on branches. We thinned the apples, removing excess fruit so the remaining ones would grow larger and better. And we waited for word on the grant. It came in August, a phone call from David Chun congratulating us on being selected as one of 3 orchards nationwide to receive funding. $200,000 over 3 years, renewable if we met certain benchmarks around preservation and education. Eleanor cried when I told her, actual tears running down her weathered face. "He did it," she kept saying. "My grandfather. He made something worth saving. He really did it." We threw a party. Eleanor, Tom, Catherine, who flew in from Seattle, some of the local buyers who'd supported the orchard, David Chun from the Grant Organization, and me. We ate and drank apple cider and celebrated under the summer trees. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the orchard felt not like a relic or a burden, but like a living, thriving future. As people mingled and talked and made plans, I found myself standing apart, looking at the orchard I'd stumbled into almost a year ago. A place I hadn't wanted, hadn't planned for, hadn't imagined could become home. And yet here I was, rooted into the soil as surely as the trees, part of something larger than myself, part of a story that would continue long after I was gone. Eleanor appeared beside me, 2 glasses of cider in her hands. She gave me one, and we stood together in comfortable silence. "I never thanked you," she said finally, "for stopping that day, for saying yes when you probably should have kept driving, for caring about this place when you had no reason to." "I had every reason to," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." That's how the best things happen, I think. We stumble into them. We say yes before we understand what we're agreeing to. And then suddenly, we're somewhere we never planned to be. And it's exactly where we needed to end up. Your grandfather knew that. He did. He used to say the orchard grew itself, but really, he meant that it had its own wisdom, its own plan. Our job wasn't to control it, but to listen to what it needed and try to provide it. She sipped her cider. "You listened, Maya. From the very first day, you listened." September came around again, the year completing its cycle. The harvest began on the exact same day it had begun the year before, and this time we had helped Tom and 3 other workers Eleanor had hired with grant money, people who were learning the craft, who would carry it forward. I still picked apples, still walked the orchard every morning, still felt that same sense of purpose I'd found on my second day. But now, I also managed the website, coordinated with buyers, wrote educational materials about heirloom varieties, and worked on my second book, which was about the orchard's future rather than my own past. One afternoon, as we worked through the same trees I'd harvested alone a year ago, Eleanor said, "I'm making you a partner. Equal share in the orchard, equal say in decisions. It's already drawn up with my lawyer. You just need to sign." I stopped picking, turned to face her. "Eleanor, I can't. That's too much." "It's not enough," she interrupted. "You've given this place a future. You've made it matter again. When I'm gone, I want to know it'll be in hands that care about it properly. Tom's good. The new workers are promising. But you understand." In the same way, my grandfather understood. It's not about the apples or the money or even the history. It's about stewardship, about being worthy of what you've been given. What if I mess it up? What if you won't? And if you do, you'll fix it. That's what we do here. We tend, we learn, we adapt. The orchard teaches us if we let it. She smiled. "Say yes, Maya. Stop overthinking and just say yes." So I did. We signed the papers in October, with Tom and Catherine as witnesses, and I became a co-owner of Blackwood Orchard. The place that had saved me was now mine to save, mine to preserve, mine to grow. My book came out in November, to good reviews and decent sales. People wrote to me saying they bought apples from our website, that they wanted to visit, that they'd been inspired to think differently about food and sustainability and the value of preserving things that mattered. The orchard got more attention, more orders, more interest, but it stayed small. That was intentional. We could have expanded aggressively, could have bought neighboring properties and planted thousands more trees. But that wasn't the point. The point was quality over quantity, relationship over conquest, being worthy of what we'd been given. December brought snow and the quiet dormancy of winter. I walked through the orchard alone one evening, my footsteps crunching in the fresh snow, my breath visible in the cold air. The trees stood bare and patient, gathering strength, and I thought about cycles again, how endings and beginnings blur together, how nothing is ever really lost, just transformed. The November apple trees, we had 6 now, grown from those first grafts, stood among the others, younger and smaller, but already showing promise. They'd produce fruit for the first time next fall, and Eleanor was already planning the marketing, the special events, the way we'd honor her grandfather's final gift to the orchard. We did it, I said to the trees, to the orchard, to whatever spirit animated this place. We kept it going. We made it matter. The trees didn't answer, of course. They just stood in their perfect rows, doing what they'd always done, growing, producing, enduring. Growing untouched by doubt or fear or uncertainty, because that was their nature. That was what Eleanor's grandfather had bred into them, and what Eleanor had maintained, and what I would now protect. I walked back to the cottage as full dark fell, smoke rising from the chimney, lights warm in the windows. My home, my life, my future, rooted deep in soil that had been waiting for me long before I knew it existed. Inside, I made tea and opened my laptop and started writing the 3rd chapter of my new book about the orchard's 2nd century, about the people who would tend it after Eleanor and I were gone, about the way good work echoes forward through time if you do it with care and intention and love. The words came easily now, flowing like they were being dictated rather than created. I wrote about apples and legacy, and the difference between owning something and belonging to it. I wrote until late in the night, until my tea went cold and my eyes grew heavy, until the story of the orchard that grew untouched became inseparable from my own story, the two narratives breaking together into something larger than either alone. When I finally closed the laptop and went to bed, I fell asleep immediately, dreamlessly, the sleep of someone whose body is tired from good work, and whose mind is at peace with the choices that brought them here. Outside, the orchard rested under its blanket of snow, patient and eternal, growing slowly in the darkness, preparing for another spring, another harvest, another year of quiet persistence against a world that had mostly forgotten that such places could still exist. But they did exist. We existed. And we would continue, one apple at a time, one season at a time, one generation at a time, for as long as someone was willing to listen to what the trees needed and care enough to provide it. That was the promise. That was the work. That was enough.